What do you think, Jonathan? Think we should get started?
Let's get it going.
All right, let's get going. So thank you everyone for showing up today. We're going to go over the what was known as the CAVE framework, now as the RAISE framework. As everything in IT, it does have an acronym. So we'll let Brant, who runs our security analytics team, and Jonathan Townsend are going to team up for the presentation today. But I wanted to start off by saying thank you for being a customer. Thank you for being a CAVE customer. There's a lot of them on this call today. As you know, we've been delivering this as a service and a services offering for quite some time. And some of the largest corporations in the total market are using it today. So what it allows you to do is be able to run your SOC more efficiently. And we'll go through some actual screenshots as well as some of the upgrades that we've done. And then we're actually going to have a product demo at the end as well. So a couple of things I wanted to cover off on. You should have received a gift card for attendance today. That might be in your spam folder. We've already had a couple, reach out and say they don't have it, and that's where they found it. So if you might want to check your spam folder for that. Also, after this presentation today, we're going to do a survey, and then we're going to do a drawing, and we'll actually send out another gift card for participation in the survey. We want your feedback. We need your feedback. This product has been built by feedback from our customers, and that's how it will continue to be built going forward. So with that, I want to pass it over to Brant and Jonathan, and they'll take it from here.
All right. Thanks, Dan. I appreciate it. And thanks everyone for joining today. As Dan said, probably one of the bigger announcements that we'll make today is just the rebranding of CAVE. So, CAVE, as Dan said, had been, built a lot by feedback from our customers. And one of the pieces of feedback we've gotten was the name was a little bit misaligned. So rebranding it to the RAISE framework, and RAISE stands for Real-Time Analytics, Insights, and Security Engine. So very in line with what the product itself does. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to go over today, run through the agenda. So today we're first going to start and dig into what are the pillars of cybersecurity and how a SIM really aligns to those pillars. Talk a little bit about the Splunk security maturity model and how Splunk evolves from being a great log and searching platform into being a very active SIM. From there, we're going to talk a little bit about how the RAISE framework itself is built and why we do things the way we do inside of the framework itself. We're going to get into some roadmap content, and then we'll pivot over to talk about a demo. With that, we'll dive into it. All right, so at Set Solutions, we see the pillars of cybersecurity as three primary entities. There's identity, who's doing what, on what. There's location, where is it occurring? Is it on-prem, off-prem, in a sensitive area of the location? Is it in the cloud, etc.? Location, as we get less and less bound to data centers and static perimeters, becomes a harder and harder question to answer. And then lastly is inventory. And inventory is an understanding of what all of your digital and physical assets and intellectual property assets are. Where are they and how are they configured throughout your environment? Without understanding these three pillars, it's very challenging to answer any questions around cybersecurity incidents or events. It becomes much more of just chasing your tail, trying to address alerts, and that's not a very productive way to approach cybersecurity challenges. So how do these really play into a SIM, and how do these types of tools work with the pillars? So a SIM really focuses on trying to extract the relevant information out of logs to express to the SOC analysts, the true identity of what a user is, right? Where is that user? What machine are they accessing? Where are the servers that they're interacting with? And that gets very closely into location. Where are they interacting with? Where are they interacting from? Are they on the network? Are they off the network? All of these things are incredibly relevant to the level of severity of a security incident. And then lastly, inventory. who's everyone on my network? Has a new person joined my network that wasn't there prior? What are all these machines that are doing on my network? Can I answer the question of, is everyone accessing my data supposed to be accessing my data? Do I understand who all in my environment should be able to do certain functions? And until you can answer, what your inventory is, where the location of an event occurred is, and who or what assets are tied to that specific event, you're pretty blind to the actual relevant information around the event, the contextual details needed to appropriately address anything. So how does someone take a logging platform that's very robust and capable of answering a lot of individual questions and take that and get it into a SIM? So first, the maturity model starts with onboarding the correct data, right? So all the relevant information for identity, that's Active Directory logs, DHCP, DNS logs. Those are some of the core functional logs that we need inside of a SIM framework to really provide adequate answers to the questions around identity. And of course, the more identity or more data that you can bring in that's relevant to the questions you're trying to answer, the better the response from your SIM will be, the more accurate, more detailed you'll have. Once you have the appropriate data in a SIM, then you take a step over to event correlation, starting to tie disparate log sources together, mapping an identity throughout a bunch of different events. So I might authenticate to Active Directory, to an IDaaS solution like Okta, or maybe there's some local authentications on a Linux server that are relevant to defining who's doing what and where. Pulling all that together to get a picture of individuals or individual assets as they move through locations really helps highlight who's doing what and where. Once you can define who's doing what and where, then you start having to prioritize, okay, what do I need to go and look at first, right? Is it the CFO that went to a website that they weren't supposed to get to, or is it the security analyst that all of a sudden had some events with a rootkit followed by some lateral movement? Sure, the CFO is probably going to have a higher relevance to or higher access to security information and intellectual property for an organization, certainly the financials, but is the overall activity on their machine more important or more indicative of an actual attack versus the security analyst who also has pretty high access, right? But on the flip side is if the CFO was receiving that type of an attack, and then a SOC analyst was receiving a similar type of an attack and patterns, you probably want to prioritize the CFO who has more pertinent access, more relevant access to an attacker that's financially motivated. So how do you start prioritizing events that can be relatively complex to unwind and see which one may be more important to respond to out of the gate? Also, prioritization is heavily influenced or heavily assisted by visualizations, right? How do you visualize what a user is actively doing? Visualizations around prioritization can really help. And then lastly, as you make your step towards a framework or a true SIM, it's alerting around known indicators as well as contextual enrichment of that data. And that's the foundation of a good threat intelligence program. So a SIM, you can build all of these components on top of Splunk independently to get to the bones of what a SIM is, or you can follow the path down and the RAISE framework will help you get to a full-featured SIM that is flexible in nature to really address the concerns of a large portion of our customer base. Right. So how does RAISE ultimately work? It's a framework that really extracts identity from disparate log sources, associates it with appropriate location, and all of that ultimately builds out your inventory of assets, people, and locations, right? So you get a true view of what's in your environment and where. And it does this, uniquely by filling in a lot of gaps that exist in certain log sources. So we'll dig in a little bit more specifics around how the Raise framework functions, and I'll turn it over to Brant to step through some of that content.
Thanks, Jonathan. So as we dig into what this actually looks like inside of our Raise framework, you'll see here is where we're actually stitching together the identity inventory inside of Raise. So what we do is we use this information to help enrich our different events. So let's zoom in a little bit on this, and you can see at the bottom, you can see the different events we're using that you should already have coming into Splunk. So in this case, a Microsoft domain login. We use the information you already have in Splunk to create that identity inventory. So we're able to say at 10:07, Christine Dowler logged into LP002 and had the IP address 10.10.110. We also are able to call out specifically that Christine Dowler is an executive. In this case, as we talked about earlier, she's our CFO. Jonathan kind of gave the example earlier. So what that lets us do is add an additional enrichment to our events so that if some high priority individual or asset is going through and has suspicious activity in their system. And we'll see that a little bit later on. So how do we actually use this identity within Raise? So very rarely when you bring a log source into Splunk is it going to give you the full picture of your data sources. Typically, you're going to get some missing information like you would see on the table on the left. What we do is we help you populate in the missing information, give you the full picture of your user, host, and IP address for any events coming in Splunk. We also use time-based mapping so that you know when a user switches between systems. So as you can see from 1052 to 1103, John Smith actually logs into a different host and has a different IP address. Given the information on the left, you wouldn't have known that this was John Smith without this identity information inside of Raise. So what we do is we bring in your different data sources, as Jonathan touched on, from your security suite. So these are some example data sources of what you may be interested in bringing in. But the beauty of the Raise platform is any of these are interchangeable. The more data you bring in, the more visibility we're going to be able to provide. So go ahead, Jonathan.
Yeah, and one thing to kind of add into this around the way that we ingest logs and data sources within the Raise framework is definitely pretty different than how ES requires data sources to be onboarded for its functionality. We don't require SIM compliance across all of our log sources. We just look to map the appropriate fields. So that allows us to be a lot more modular on the back end. So for example, if one of our customers was to switch from Palo Alto to a Fortinet firewall, it's a pretty seamless move. Same with, moving from CrowdStrike to another vendor. All of the logs are very portable and interchangeable so that it allows the development and the efforts that our customers put in to build out use cases and correlation rules inside of the Raise framework to have that value retained if any of the backend vendors are changed without significant efforts to ensure that the new log sources are mapped to SIM compliance within Splunk.
Yeah, that's a good point, Jonathan. We actually had one of our customers, CIO, kind of mimic or kind of say the same exact thing. They moved from one of the vendors that's on this page to another vendor. And they said, as far as the framework was concerned, it was literally as long as we got the logs and we had the same type of information, our SOC process didn't change. And he felt very confident that this was providing the value he needed.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. So once we have all this information, we really start to create the correlation searches and start alerting on different suspicious activity. And once we have those different correlations, as Jonathan touched on earlier, we start to want to visualize that and prioritize what alerts should I spend my time on as a SOC analyst. So what we do is create what we call a host and user scorecard. And so very clearly at the top, you can see who is the most suspicious activity, where do I need to spend my time as an analyst. We have a very flexible scoring system in place that makes it very easy for you to change how these are scored, and really makes it easy for you to prioritize your efforts. So let's dig into this a little bit more. For this example, we'll look back at Christine Dowler, who we touched on earlier, who was our CFO. So very quickly, we can see she's got the top score of 40 and has unauthorized access attempts from Okta and a known DNS domain match from Recorded Future. We also can see that because she is an executive, we're able to bubble up her to the top and prioritize our efforts on making sure everything's okay on her system. So using that match, she is an executive, we're able to add a multiplier of 2 to her score. So you'll see 15 plus 5 times 2 gives us our score of 40. So this makes it very easy and very flexible for us to bubble up suspicious activity to the top.
Yeah. So what about administrators? We got asked a question the other day from a customer on what if it's administrator trying to log in remotely and so forth, and with everybody working remotely today, how flexible is that to be able to put different types of users in that high risk category?
Yeah, so very flexible. We can match based on patterns. So if you have a well-defined admin account format, we can add in matching off of that. If you want to bring in, like we've done in this example, high priority list of users, so your executives. We even have some users that use it the other way, and for their security teams, where they may be doing red team activities, we actually want to drop their scores. We don't want to see them bubble up to the top all the time, and you can actually add in negative scores. So it's a very flexible framework, and adds a lot of capabilities for you to make this work for you as you need it.
Yeah, and one thing I'd like to kind of add is a little bit of a differentiator in how we approach scoring mechanisms for our prioritization list for users and hosts is it's very straightforward, right? So we're not trying to apply a lot of analytics to generate a score in some type of a black box algorithm. When you start going down that path, the tuning of that becomes a nightmare, right? It's all done programmatically versus having, multiple score multipliers that an analyst can quickly go and tune as necessary. So what a lot of our customers really appreciate is the fact that it's not a mystical score. You can see exactly how it's calculated, and you can easily tune how that is calculated per your environment. We don't put ourselves in the position to where we assume that our math or analytics can match every customer's environment. We just expose the algorithms and the way we generate these scores very cleanly and clearly to the administrators and customers of the RAISE framework. That's not to say we don't use any of the Splunk analytics on the back end for correlation or any of the ML toolkit components that are exposed here. We absolutely use that on the back end to generate hits and generate information, but the scoring mechanism and the ability to tune that is very straightforward.
There is a question too from one of the panelists, Jonathan. I don't know if you see that or not, but I think
if I see it pop in there. The question is, how do you define a privileged user? Also, to escalate these types of events, which are aligned to privileged and access accounts. So to answer that question, it's going to be pretty dependent on how one would choose to define a privileged user, whether that is based off of individuals, so you can create a list of privileged users, or you can, create a list spawned off of Active Directory groups, or you can, match on patterns within a username. But it's going to be up to the organization to really define who is privileged or who is sensitive. And you can have multiple different groups associated with different sensitivity or privilege layers, and have different multipliers associated with those as well, including negative multipliers to drop certain types of events and content from other users out of the dashboard. So that's really around how we define a privileged user. And then we had another question: can Raise handle 2 environment identities, like an on-premise jdo at abc.com and AWS jdo at abcdaws.com, and have the 2 environments with different log sources, i.e. pan abcd and pan abcd aws? So we absolutely can handle multiple different entities and environment names and all those various disparate sources. If there is a trust or a way to unify linking those together, we could certainly even stitch together dual homed identities. It definitely gets a lot easier if you start looking at IDaaS tools with universal directories like Okta, to where we have middleware already pulling and stitching all that information together for us. But if we have to do it on the back end, we certainly have the engine that's flexible enough to accommodate those 2 types of environment identities. All right, I think that
Great questions.
Yep, great questions. I think that does it for the open ones. Brent, back on over to you.
Sure. So actually, Jonathan, I'm going to hand it over to you to talk through how this all fits in within the Splunk ecosystem.
Sounds good. All right, so the overall Splunk ecosystem, there's a lot of different facets to Splunk. There's just normal, Splunk on its own, which is fantastic log aggregation and search tool. But as you start talking about the context of Splunk as a SIEM, generally you're going to see it carved up, in our world, at least 3 different ways. There's the Raise platform, which does a lot of the core functionality that any SIEM is going to need to do to perform its true job, right? And all of this that we have captured here is supported within the Raise framework, including enterprise support, which is going to be a new thing that we're offering, is actual support capabilities for the Raise framework. The ability to have a referenceable use case library. A lot of other SIEMs will refer to this as correlation rules. Those types of functions have a large referenceable use case library inside of Raise framework. The overall time-based host enrichment is a core functionality, as is incident response and drill down. We do integrate with existing ticketing systems, as well as we can build a customized ticketing system inside of the Raise framework. We look at ticketing systems and incident workflows within Raise as another flexible capability within the platform. That way, we're not trying to take our SIEM and dictate how you are choosing to respond and manage and orchestrate incidents. We'd prefer to integrate the SIEM into your existing incident workflow. That said, if we do have customers that we have developed custom workflows inside of the Raise framework, if so chosen. Management view and reporting, that is a great function of the scorecards, is being able to export and roll up management views so that they can understand overall incidents for a given time frame. Risk-based alerting is core to the framework. And threat intelligence and integration, we'll talk a little bit more about some of the partnerships we have around threat intelligence platforms, including Recorded Future, as we get into some of the roadmap content. Splunk UBA, right now inside the Raise framework, that does require customization, but it is achievable. And then compliance views, This is something we'll also dig into as we talk about the roadmap here shortly. Enterprise security, of course, that's supported by Splunk itself. They have pre-built content around correlations for anything that does match SIM compliance. So there's a heavy requirement in ES to have normalized data, right? Which is what SIM compliance really lines into. They do have separate asset and identity lookups. They are more point in time lookups. They also have the core concept of incident drill down and review. The incident workflows, theirs is definitely more mature, but it's also housed within its own incident and ticketing system, right? And it can be extended as you look at some of their phantom tools. They have a separate posture view versus having the kind of unified rollup. Limited visualizations out of the box around risk-based alerting. The framework is looking to add new sources within Splunk ES. They do have the more robust and native integration with Splunk UBA. They don't have any compliance views. Now, the beauty here is that you don't have to choose one or the other. They do, in fact, live very well alongside of each other. And you kind of get, the best of both worlds if you so choose to have ES and the RACE framework running together, where you can get, the powerful identity views from RACE, but you're also able to get the core workflows and investigation framework of ES. And also any of the additional correlation triggers can be events fed into the RACE framework from ES, and all the additional sources that ES can onboard from a threat intelligence perspective. So that's kind of the breakdown we see across all three. RACE absolutely is, as you can see around the feature parity here, very much robust to live on its own, robust enough to live on its own. So is Splunk ES. It just really depends pretty heavily on how much time you want to spend focusing on data normalization and where the gaps align between the two products and which is your preferred or prioritized requirements. And of course, you can always run them both together and you get the complete package of ES and RACE. All right. So what's the relevance to all of this? Why do we drive towards more flexible scoring within the SIM that can really align with what your environment needs? We do it so that we can increase visibility, right? Get more value out of the logs that you can ingest that are relevant to your environment without having to spend an overly large amount of time of curating your log sources and making sure that the data mapping is appropriate and data curation is done correctly so that it can feed a full-fledged or more robust SIM like an ES. So we like to stay flexible, nimble, so we can get more visibility quicker and have more wins for your environment and your SOC, because the more wins you have, the more visibility you have, the overall better your mean time to detect, mean time to respond, and mean time to recover, or mean time to contain really are. So, and that's ultimately the goal of any good security program or SOC, is to constantly trying to march towards reducing those numbers, detecting incidents quicker, responding to them faster, and containing and resolving them with as little friction and business interruption as possible. So that's why we're doing all of what we're doing, is to make sure that we can continue to march towards a more effective SOC. Right.
So, we can see it, Brant. It looks good.
No additional questions are coming in. So Brant, you just want to walk through a couple of use cases for anyone that hasn't seen the RACE framework's current interface?
Sure, absolutely. And just confirm you guys are seeing the correct screen, right? The user scorecard.
You got it. Yep.
Perfect. So as we talked about before, as an analyst, one of the first places you're going to come look is going to be one of the two scorecards, either user scorecard or host scorecard. So So using the same example we talked about earlier, we'll look at Christine Dowler, who we said was our CFO. And first thing I'm going to want to do is really dig into the details of these events. So what we allow you to do is pivot directly from the screen into what we call the scorecard events, or the actual details of the alerts behind the scenes. So in here, you'll get all the information of where did the user come from. We can see, okay, here, what network are they logged into? In here, we get the information about, for the Okta login attempt, what app were they trying to log into? Where did they try to log in from? We have the details on the domain that matched in the recorded future event. So it makes it very clear for you to get all of the context of what went on for these different events for a particular user very quickly. We also allow you to drill down into what we call mega search. And mega search is going to be all of the information about this particular user and the host name related to these events. So what this allows you to do is pull in information from Active Directory and populate in any sort of information about their title, who their manager is, any of their AD groups they're in, any information that really helps you as an analyst quickly decide what actions you need to take. We also provide the same information for the particular host name. So we can tell you what operating system is on there, what groups it belongs to within Active Directory, really giving you the full picture of your events. We also show you related identities. So what this is really helpful for is if you start to see any sort of lateral movement, you have this picture that's drawn out for you of what systems and what identities they went and touched. As we scroll down here a little bit further, we give you the full picture of their scores across the host and user scorecard entries, and a little bit more about the identities and the information that populated in that identities. So we can see here that Christine Dowler did in fact log into LP002 and what IP address she had at the time. So this is really used to fill in some of the blanks as you're going through an investigation of the user and host involved. And then if you really want to get into the details of the actual events for identities, as we showed earlier, you can come into the identity drill down and see the specific login and authentication events related to that identity. So we can see we had some Okta logins from 86, 86, 86, 86. And then we can shift over and see, okay, now this is their internal IP address of 10.10.110 from this host. So really building out that full picture of the identity and following them throughout your environment. Another thing I want to show you guys is we do have a lot of documentation outside of the system, but built directly into this app. We do provide you with some documentation to help get you started on how do you actually build out a different cave search and use that identity to populate in information. So as we talked about earlier with the not needing SIM compliance, what we allow you to do is use very simple macros to populate in the information needed and really give you that full picture and full mapping of events that we talked about earlier. And then the last thing I will jump over to is talking about a little bit of our flexible scoring. So lots of different events in here and very easy for you to come in here as a user and set the score for your different events coming in. So for instance, in this case, if we have a console login without MFA, we really want to bubble that up to the top. So we give that a higher score of 60. So it really makes it easy for you to set and customize this environment to what you want to see. You can even see we have a few examples that maybe we don't care that the event happened on its own, but maybe it adds some additional context. So we want to actually give it a score of 0. It doesn't affect the overall score, but add some additional context when we see it with some other events around it.
Cool. Well, don't have any. Oh, we do have another question. I think we kind of popped it up as it came in, and the question was, where is the use case library? So that was one of the areas that Brent was just stepping through as you saw the various scores. That's all the existing use cases that we have built into it. It's pretty easy to add your own as well, and you can look in those various lookup views. You can see exactly what searches are being run to map to a specific use case. All right. So another question, Brant, is in the chat. Ray's working with ES, but how does it work with security essentials if they aren't going full ES?
Yeah, absolutely. So security essentials, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, is a lot of high value pre-canned searches provided by Splunk through Splunk base. So if you are able to run security essentials and use those searches and actually populate them based on the data you have already, it's very easy to port those searches over into Scorecard. So you would walk through what we have documented out here and just basically make sure you add in the information to map in your identity, and then it would automatically flow into Scorecard. So it's very easy to take the pre-canned searches from Security Essentials and port them into here.
So really just becomes an avenue for Splunk built use cases being ported into the RAISE framework. Cool. All right. Any other questions out there? Otherwise, oh, here we go. So how do we baseline identity with assets? Let's say I access servers 1 through 4, but all of a sudden my account starts accessing server 5. Would that bubble to the top and I would have to investigate? And then how would we show that it is normal communication?
So I'll go ahead and jump in on that one, Jonathan. That's actually something we're working on developing out a little further right now. So one of the things that we do with the identity that we build is we build out that historical information of what you have been accessing over time. So what we're working on building out right now is a few pre-canned searches that will look at that and identify, hey, this is the first time I've accessed this system. Yeah. And being able to add some automated scoring to that.
Yeah, it's kind of in line with UEBA, right? Is looking for behavioral analytics and anomalous behavior. We're starting to incorporate more of that type of analytics into it. But alternatively, if you are running any type of UEBA tool in your environment that is generating logged information or events around that type of behavior, we can ingest that into the RAISE framework and provide those as scored alerts as a separate feed into it or data source into it. But as Brant said, we are working on that as a part of our roadmap.
Those are all great questions. I think we're at the end. We got about a couple of minutes to wrap up. Jonathan, anything you want to cover off on before we leave our customers and prospects today?
Just thanks for the time. We do have some new licensing models that we've launched around both the recorded future license as well as commercial support around the RAISE framework. So if you're interested in having support options for historical cave or current RAISE, reach out to your account team. We'll start those conversations, as well as if you're interested in learning more about the recorded future licensing capabilities, reach on out. Or if you just want to, hands-on demo, happy to carve out some time and walk through the framework in more detail with you.
All right. Thank you, Brant. Thank you, Jonathan. Hopefully everybody is up to speed on what we're doing now with RAISE, not CAVE framework going forward. And we appreciate your time today. Appreciate you being a customer and a prospect. And we look forward to presenting more to you as need be. So thanks everyone, and have a great rest of your week.
Thanks.